Hi everyone. So this week what we're going to focus on is how to add more than one visualization to our page. Now that we finally have visualizations, we're going to look at how we can add multiple charts to our page and also how we can begin leveraging an existing CSS framework, someone else's CSS framework called Bootstrap, to also improve the layout of our pages. Because right now we're able to do some limited styling, but we are a far cry from the kind of sophisticated layouts that we often see news organizations use. And most importantly, we don't yet have a way to make our page behave or appear differently depending on the device through which it's viewed, right? And because we know how important mobile audiences are for news, and particularly for the kinds of communities that we're covering in this class, we want to make sure that our material is as accessible and readable and appropriate to the device it's being presented on as possible. So before we get started, of course, I'm going to do my usual thing here, which is I am going to get on my desktop and what I'm going to do is make sure that my GitHub repo is up to date. So here's my repo is dataviz A. I'm going to change into that. I'm going to do a little git status. And it looks like it's okay with origin master. I'm going to do a git pull just in case because I like to be conservative in these things. And it actually does look like there was a change. When it says that working tree clean, the working tree is actually your local computer. And so I always want to make sure to do a git pull if I am not actually just re-downloading if I'm not using git clone to download a whole new copy of my repo. So now that I have that set, I'm going to take a look at what I have at the moment. And of course, this is the page that I've been working on, I believe. So I'm going to open it up in Chrome and then also in Aptana. So just to remind myself what I have here. So as we discussed, and as we saw last week, I've put this visualization inside a div that has a background color and a fixed height and width so that the page doesn't jump when it loads, because that is super, super frustrating from a user's perspective. And all it takes is a tiny amount of CSS, a little bit of forethought to make that never happen again. So if I look at my file in Aptana, let me just pull this up. What we're going to do is we're going to edit and augment. Basically, we're going to just learn how can we duplicate how can we reuse the code or duplicate the code that we have in order to get more than one chart on the page. And in this case, there are a bunch of different ways that we could approach solving this problem. We're going to take sort of the most straightforward way, which is something that we will probably refine later on. But we'll start out with the most straightforward way to approach this process, which is basically copying our code. So as you recall here, we have our draw chart function. We have this function that says Google Charts set onload callback, right? So this is the thing that says, hey, you're going to need to go load, we've already said here, go load some information, this core charts package from Google. And whenever Google rings us back, which is this function, then I want you to draw the chart. Now, the thing about this draw chart function is it contains a lot of specifics. So again, we see this process of refactoring where we start out by writing something in a way such that it works. And then we try to pull out, very often we'll try to pull out the specifics so that we don't have to, so that we can reuse that code in multiple places. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to literally duplicate my draw chart function. So I need to make sure that that I have unique names for these functions, but at the moment, I'm not going to worry too much about my refactoring. I'm just going to say draw chart 1. Okay, and I'm going to just make sure that I'm getting everything in here. So if I see, you can actually use these little blue buttons at the left in Aptana. So if I collapse this, it actually shows me where the end of that function is. And I can confirm that it is in fact, which I've helpfully labeled in my comments, that it is in fact all the way at the end of this script. So I now have a function called drawChart1, okay? And I'm literally just going to copy this code and I'm going to duplicate it. And now I'm going to give my second function a different name, DrawChart2, and now I have two distinct functions. Now, of course, there's something else important that's happening here, which is that the contained within this function, it is targeting a specific div in which to place my visualization, right? So I need to make sure that I have two separate divs so that I can have two separate visualizations, and I need to make sure that that each of these functions is targeting a different div. So I'm going to change this to chart1 div, and I'm going to change this to chart2 div, and then of course down in the body of my HTML, I need to make sure that I have also changed those things. So if I go back here and I reload the page in Chrome, oops, what happened? Well, if you'll recall, I changed the name of my function from DrawChart to DrawChart1, and then I also made the DrawChart2 copy. But I have this function here that is only trying to, that's calling DrawChart, right? So I have to make sure that I'm actually calling these functions as we've discussed. I can define them, they're there and ready to go, but until I actually call them, they're not going to do anything. Now, I cannot call them until this thing happens. And so the question is, what's the easiest and most effective way for me to call multiple functions within this, on this when this callback from Google comes, right? What's the best way to do that? The trick is that, while it would be really nice if we could just say, okay, well, when you're done with this, just call both of the functions, right? We could just say, okay, just give it all of the functions that it needs to call. Well, unfortunately, this only calls one of them. And oh, and you notice actually that, see how I'm getting that annoying jump again? The reason why is because the div that I created, the style that I applied, if I look at my styles.css, I applied it via the div ID, right? If it was a class, it would still be there. But because I did it when I changed the ID of that div, right? Remember, I changed it from chart div to chart1 div. That style was no longer being applied, and that's why I'm getting that skip. So at this point, I have two visualizations. I might want to actually create a class for those visualizations. I'm not going to do that at the moment because that's going to play into how we look at laying out our page more broadly. So I'm just going to apply this to both of those divs. So I now just, again, copied that style and assigned it also to chart2 div. So back here, we see that, well, now the first one gets executed okay, and of course here is the empty div. This is chart2 div. No chart. So not what we were hoping for. So we're going to have to do take another approach, which fortunately is still pretty simple. Basically, we're going to make a sort of meta function called, in this case, I'm going to call mine draw all charts, right? And that function will very simply be where we say, okay, first I want you to draw chart 1, and then I want you to draw chart 2. Right? And so this function now calls these our two new functions, and we'll make this the function that gets called when Google calls us back with the material that we need. Okay, so I would of course want to comment this function, but all it does is just call two other functions. Now you may wonder, why doesn't it work to just pass those functions? Well, again, this setOnload callback function is one that's been provided to us by Google, right? So they get to set the rules in that case, and the rules that they set say, I can only do one thing. I'm only going to do one thing. And so what that means is that we have to then adjust our code to be compatible with that and say, okay, if you can only do one thing when you get back, then we're going to have to create a container function that itself does multiple things in order to make sure that all of the charts that we want to get drawn. So hopefully I will now see two charts. They will look basically identical. And there they are, right? So now I have two charts on my page. That's great. I'm going to just, for the sake of being able to distinguish them, I am going to change the title on one of them. Right? And that way I can just, again, confirm that these are in fact two separate charts, even though right now all the data is the same. Now, I want to flag the fact that there is a lot more that we can, and we certainly will eventually do, to make these functions reusable, right? So it totally works for me to just have two completely separate functions, and I have completely separate options, which in general we probably will need, right? This options variable is probably going to need to be unique for every visualization that we do, you know, as is the certainly the data and all of that stuff. So we can keep this in this way and just have two separate functions and all of the stuff we need contained within those functions. We may get to the point where we actually want to be even a little bit more generic than this, and where we will amend, we'll still have a single draw chart function, but we'll actually assign it ingredients that include things like the names of our columns and our data and the options and even the name of the div that we want to have the particular visualization go into, so that we don't have to have all of these extra functions around. At the moment, however, this is a perfectly reasonable way to solve the problem. And as you can see, we can pretty quickly leverage the work that we've already done to add multiple visualizations to the page. So when we come back, we're going to look at using Bootstrap to provide us with a CSS framework that is going to not only let us get a more professional looking layout to our pages, but also to support different views of the page depending on the size of the window or the device that it's being viewed through. So I will see you all in a minute.